Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. 12 after 9 exactly. Welcome back to the second hour of News and Views right here on Salam Media. We're going to be talking with Guy Martin. He's the editor of Defense Web. We're going to be talking about the proficiency, I guess, for want of a better word, of the SANDF. But first up, let me give you a little bit of insights to Defense Web. And obviously, Guy Martin's going to tell us a little more. But just on the side, Defense Web's traffic has grown enormously over the last decade, starting off with just over 1,000 readers per month in October 2008. In September 2018, Defense Web recorded 86,000 visitors to the website and 230,000 hits. 2 years later, monthly traffic stood at 120,000 unique visitors and 500,000 page views. Now that is phenomenal growth, and you kind of ask the question, why the interest in Defense Web? What are they all about? What sort of information are they putting out, and why are we so eager to get hold of this information? Guy Martin, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program, and many congratulations on this enormous growth of visitors and viewers to your website.
Good morning, and thanks so much for having me. As you mentioned, our traffic has grown phenomenally over the last decade. And I think since incidents like the July unrest last year, when the SANDF were called out to the deployment to Mozambique, to the SANDF involved in flood relief in KwaZulu-Natal, there's been a lot of interest in the military, because the military, although it's a peacetime military, it is extremely active. The SANDF are doing a lot, and often people don't realize how busy they are. Another thing that the SANDF are doing is border patrol. So we've got about a couple of thousand soldiers securing our borderline. So I think that with the greater presence of the military across the country, there's a lot more interest in it.
Okay, so obviously, as you've rightly said, due to the insurrection last year, more and more people are interested in your website. What type of information do you put out there?
We mostly publish news stories. So every day we publish between 5 and 10 news stories. We also try and cover analysis, and also try and look at the bigger picture, not just in South Africa, but continental defense matters as well. We also cover technology stories, things like piracy, the growth of unmanned aerial vehicles, cyber warfare, and emerging threats, and so on.
Okay, you mentioned that the SANDF is a peacetime military. How is that different to perhaps the US military and other countries' military? We also are aware of the fact that as we speak, the US military are running a joint either joint operation or some sort of training with the SANDF. How significant is that, and what does that tell us as ordinary citizens?
I think you must be referring to exercise Shared Accord, which
Yes,
recently wrapped up
correct. Hmm.
last month. So the U.S. military, I mean, they've been fighting active conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 20 years, you could say. They also have partnerships and a small presence in places like Somalia, where they are conducting drone strikes. So they are actively engaged in low-level combat in some areas of the world. Uh, we say South Africa is a peacetime military, which is in the larger sense. It's true. We are not engaged in any against any country. We don't have an adversary that we're clearly fighting against. But the SANDF is engaged in combat operations in Mozambique with the SADC mission in Mozambique. And we are also participating in the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC. And our soldiers have seen a fair bit of combat in both the DRC and Mozambique. And obviously, before that, South Africa has been involved in peacekeeping operations in places like Sudan, and we've lost a few soldiers there. We've also seen combat in the Central African Republic, and we lost over a dozen soldiers there in 2012 in the Battle of Bangui. So when we say the SANDF is a peacetime military, they are involved in some combat operations, but most of their activity is focused on things like disaster relief, humanitarian assistance, border patrol, search and rescue, and so on.
That shared accord with the US military, what was that all about? Was it just trying to bring our soldiers up to speed? I kind of always question the type of training SANDF undergoes. Is it world class? Simply because, post or in the midst of the insurrection last year, we saw little or no action by the SANDF, because I believe that was the most crucial time when they should have made their presence felt. But then perhaps it was government that let us down, that they didn't deploy the army out to contain law and order in KZN.
The exercise with the United States, that's nothing new. The United States has been conducting these exercises not just with South Africa, but with many other countries in the region. This, I think, was the third or fourth exercise shared accord to come to South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. And that's basically just training exercises. They were focusing on humanitarian assistance, providing medical care to the local population. There were some other scenarios, riot control, and so forth. So that's not really anything out of the ordinary. And these sort of exercises are very good practice for the SANDF. I think it's part of the American approach of trying to build up and strengthen and work with partners in Africa. The United States Africa Command, that's their main goal. They don't want to interfere too much. They just want to work with partners across the continent to help bring them up to speed and strengthen their capabilities. As to the deployment of the SANDF during the July unrest, I think it's a bit unfair to say that the SANDF didn't do much. I think their presence turned the tide and was able to finally bring all that unrest under control. But what is very important to remember is that the SANDF, they're not mandated to function as a police force. When they are deployed, for instance, to fight crime, as we've seen happen in the Western Cape, they are supposed to work with the police. So the SANDF should never take a proactive role, take the main lead in domestic operations when it comes to things like crowd control and controlling civil unrest. So one doesn't want to see the SANDF patrolling the streets and functioning like the police, because they don't have the training for it, and they're not meant to be doing those sort of roles.
Okay, just regarding the SANDF being present and turning the tide as far as the July riots were concerned, I do believe, my personal thoughts is that had they been deployed earlier enough, we wouldn't have seen the large scale, destruction that we saw of property and loss of life. But that's my personal opinion. Do you believe that the SANDF, let me put this question differently. Your thoughts on the SANDF not being able to deploy more than 200 soldiers on the ground at any given time? Is that because they are engaged elsewhere, maybe Mozambique, border patrolling, etc., etc., and that's why there is almost a constraint on their reserves, their backup reserves?
Well, it's actually not the case that they can only deploy 200 soldiers. Um, the SANDF has put 200 personnel on standby in case they are called upon by the president to assist the police with crime fighting. As we saw in July, thousands of soldiers were made available to fight the unrest, but that was they were scraping the barrel. They were grabbing clerks, they were grabbing cooks. Any member of the SANDF that could hold a rifle was called up and sent out. The SANDF can muster more than 200 personnel, but the numbers that it can actually deploy at the moment are extremely low. So I would say maybe
Because why, Guy?
because the SANDF is underfunded and overstretched. So as I mentioned, we've got soldiers on border patrol, we've got soldiers in the DRC, in Mozambique. There's still quite a few in KZN. So they are quite overcapacitated at the moment. And also, if you are deploying soldiers, say you're deploying 3,000 soldiers, you can actually only have 1,000 on the ground at any one point in time because they work in shifts. So you'll have some that are training, some that are resting, or back at barracks. I mean, they can't be awake 24 hours a day. So you have to have those
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective, because we kind of forget all of that, don't we? We just want their presence to be felt, especially, in a situation like the July riots. But that being said, I understand that the SNDF has budget constraints. How does that put our safety at risk?
It's quite a concern, the way the budget is going, because the SANDF is being called on to do more and more. But there's a point where the SANDF are just going to have to say no. We can't respond. We don't have the equipment, we don't have the staff, we don't have the resources. The Department of Defense reckons the SANDF is underfunded by 50%, and they need double the amount of money that they're currently getting to fulfill their constitutional mandate. So the SANDF, they keep performing miracles, they keep pulling rabbits out of hats, and they always try and make a plan and deploy when they're asked to. But it's unsustainable. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul, essentially. So if you look at the state of our Air Force, only about a quarter of our aircraft are airworthy. A lot of our Army vehicles are 40 plus years old, and the Navy will not be able to operate most of their vessels for all that much longer because there's no money available for midlife refits and upgrades. A lot of the aircraft that are flying, spares have been cannibalized from other aircraft, and this is it's unsustainable. It can't carry on like this. So at the moment, where the defense budget is just under 50 billion rand a year, ideally that should be at least double. And we're also seeing personnel cuts. So because the defense budget has been shrinking over the years, the SANDF has been forced to cut personnel to save money. So at the moment, there are about 73,000 members of the SANDF, and over the next 3 years, that's going to be cut by 3,000. So we're just seeing the SANDF being pulled in so many different directions with a shrinking budget, aging equipment, and fewer personnel.
That ain't good news at all. I understand that half that budget goes into human resources, salaries that need to be paid, because obviously it employs a lot of people. It is touted as one of the largest employment agencies in South Africa, pun intended, obviously. And also that it's very top heavy, that there are too many chiefs and not enough Indians. How do you respond to that? And obviously, when we look at this large number of personnel that is being recruited into the SNDF, not all of them our soldiers. Of course, they're given the basic training, but as you've indicated, some of them go into, they become cleaners, cooks, all sorts of different roles that they fill. We also have a big medical corps, I should imagine, within the SANDF. So how's that all then, going to play out?
Well, it's actually more than 60% of the defense budget goes
You.
towards salaries or the compensation of employees. Um, and is quite a problem that well, ideally one should have about 30% of your budget going towards salaries, about 30% going towards acquisition, and about 30% going towards operations. So the SNDF is quite skewed at the moment, but they are trying to address this by reducing the staff count. So there is a good some move in the right direction. But again, with fewer people, the SNDF will be able to do less, and yet government keeps tasking it to do more and more. With the latest request now to help the SAPS fight crime and specifically illegal mining. Um, it's just asking a lot of a shrinking organization, and as you mentioned, not all the members of the SNDF are frontline soldiers. You've got a lot of other staff as well. But another problem is that a lot of the soldiers are aging. So the SNDF is growing
Ooh.
older, and they've been forced to trim down recruitment. So the military skills development system, which takes about 1,000 recruits every year, that's been pushed out to once every second year. And again, this is because of budget cuts. So it's quite difficult to bring in those fresh young recruits when there's just no money for it.
That leads me to my final question, and a very, very worrying question is at that, especially since you've just pointed out that we've got an aging population in the SNDF and they're not being replaced timelessly. Does that then suggest that the SNDF is defenseless? I mean, what happens? Are they geared up enough? And I know you did say that we're a peacetime military, but are we skilled enough to have a skilled enough SANDF in the eventuality that they need it to go into combat, whether it's in Mozambique or wherever else, or just, God forbid, we have another July insurrection and we need boots on the ground just to maintain, law and order, not to go out killing people or anything, but just to maintain law and order. Will they be able to defend us?
In an emergency, yes, but not for very long. And during the July unrest, I mean, there were issues. Soldiers were struggling to feed themselves. They had to buy their own rations in some cases.
Ooh.
A deployment like that cannot, like the July, in response to the July unrest, it cannot be sustained for very long. That sort of deployment is an absolute last resort emergency. And the trouble with deploying soldiers on a sort of rush basis like that is that they're not adequately equipped or trained, and things could have gotten out of control. I mean, we're lucky that soldiers didn't end up shooting civilians. So if push comes to shove, the SNDF can respond to things like the July unrest, but if there's any larger scale or sustained threat against the country, the situation doesn't look good at all.
Okay, my final question. Obviously, from what you sketched out, aging equipment, that hasn't been maintained by cannibalization, breaking down one truck and refurbishing another truck, or one aircraft to another aircraft, stuff like that is very, very worrying indeed. So, two questions very quickly is, would you, even though we know that recruitment now only takes place every second year simply because of budgetary constraints. Would that be the type of career that young people should be considering should they get into the SANDF? And how worried should we be that the situation seems pretty dire from what you've just sketched out? I mean, you've given us good news and you've given us bad news. So, how worried should we be?
To answer your first question, the SANDF, they're not just looking for soldiers. There are actually a very wide range of careers available in the SANDF. You've got engineers, you've got technicians, you've got medical personnel. So it is quite a promising field for young people if they can find space in the military. And as for your second question, it's yeah, I'm not particularly optimistic about the future of the SANDF and its ability to protect South Africa. If you look at the defense budget, it's been declining for over a decade now. The threats are growing stronger. We've got terrorists across the border in Mozambique. We've got civil unrest and crime at home. Equipment is aging. The time is running out for the lifespan of that equipment. It's a little bit pessimistic at the moment. And what also concerns me is that the government does not see defense as something that's important and that should be funded. And you can't keep drawing blood from a stone. You do less with less. You don't do more with less. And at the moment, the SANDF is being asked to do more with less, and it's just not possible.
Guy, that's all we have time for. So very many other questions, but perhaps we can reserve it for another time. Thank you indeed, Guy Martin, the editor of Defence Web. Really, your comments have been pretty sobering, I might add. But thank you for your time. Go well. God bless.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Keep well.
9:34 exactly, news and views right here on Salam Media. Standing by to talk with us now is Mohammed Yusuf about the results of the elections in Kenya. And to wrap up, we'll be talking with Trevor Shaku. He is the SAFTU spokesperson. Another worrying date to keep your eye on, and that is the 24th of August, where SAFTU is calling for a national shutdown. Please stay with us.